was an acceptance letter into Cal Arts. So it took me 3 years. I got turned down in person, but it was perseverance that finally got me in.
Yeah, and you do
It was
diligence
perseverance.
rather than going off into a corner and sucking your thumb and feeling sorry for yourself. You went to the library and did some research and
Absolutely.
made yourself a candidate. I'm going to assume, Mario, that you've had a gift, obviously, for drawing and art since you were a child. Were you always drawing as a kid?
Yes, I was. My mother always got on to me because from the very beginning, she always told me that I was always drawing on the wall. And so from the very beginning, there was something in me that wanted to create these characters that I love so much on TV. And a lot of the characters that I saw were characters that were animated by Hanna-Barbera. I mean, I grew up with Yogi Bear, Johnny Quest, what the heck, the Jetsons. You know, I loved all that stuff. I loved all that stuff, and I kept trying to imitate it off of television. And I love comic books at the same time. So I just love cartoons in general.
What are some of your favorite comic books?
Let's see. I would say some of my favorite comic books at the time. I was really big into DC Comics, which was Superman, Wonder Woman, and at the time I didn't know that there was a big rivalry between Marvel characters and DC characters. But I was really big into all the DC characters. But then I would say X-Men. Howard the Duck of all things from Marvel, and that's when I started reading X-Men in the late 70s. That's when I started switching over to Marvel, and I was really impressed with what they had. But in the 80s, you had all these independent comics that started to come to the forefront. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
A lot of people started doing their independent stuff.
Yep.
And then that's when the market really blew open. And
It's kind of a renaissance, sort of, right?
it was
for comics.
it was definitely a renaissance because everything wasn't locked into just a few companies.
Yeah.
But then everybody started to do their own thing.
So it was superheroes, action.
It was
action.
superheroes. Action
So it was never
adventure
Archie and
heroes.
Jughead or Little Lulu.
No, occasionally I would, but I would pick up those. But it was all the action comics.
Right.
Okay. I wanted some comics that had some guts to them.
And when you were in school, junior high and high school, did you take art courses and did you have a teacher who pointed the way for you? Or
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. When I was, we were fortunate enough back in my high school to have a 2-year commercial art course. And I wasn't even aware at that time that some schools here in America didn't even have an art department. So we were very, very fortunate to have that. And I ended up taking 1 year of the commercial art course, but I was also president of the art club back in Marion, Illinois.
Nice.
And from there, I just kept up my passion until I made it out here to California.
I'm curious, when you got that letter, you said you came home from work and you got the letter that you've been accepted.
Tax day.
On tax day.
Yes.
What a nice present. What work were you doing
Now,
in Marion, Illinois?
Now, in Marion, Illinois, I was working at the Marion Carnegie Library, the public library back there, and I absolutely loved it. And
What were you doing?
Now, I was a file clerk, but I also help people, and I do some research, some light research. But at the library, we had a lot of different programs that we would put on. And one of them was to put on events for kids in the children's library. So every now and again, I would draw cartoons for the kids, and I would show them about comic books. I would show them about animation, and they really got a big kick out of that.
And I'll bet you know that Dewey Decimal System backwards
yeah.
and frontwards.
Dewey Decimal system, Library of Congress system.
You know,
So-
and as an aside, it was the Carnegie Library. Andrew Carnegie, as we know, one of the wealthiest men who ever lived, an industrialist. One of his legacies to America was he funded the construction of I don't know how many, maybe hundreds of libraries all over the country, and so he lives on today in those libraries.
Absolutely, and he really provided a way for people to expand their world by providing, the access to.
Yes,
all
I'm the daughter
all
of
these great
a
books.
librarian. I grew up in the library, so
Oh, yeah.
I just when you mentioned it, I said, surrounded by books, what could be better?
And another wonderful thing about it was that when I got accepted into CalArts, my job at CalArts was working in the library there. They made me into the student supervisor because of my past experience. So it was almost like one thing led to the other.
So you were employable while you were
Absolutely.
pursuing your art education.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
So, in terms of what you did at Hanna-Barbera, what were some of the shows you worked on?
Now, some of the shows that I worked on, let's see. One of the first show that I worked on was the Smurfs. And I love that show. Let's see, I worked on Yo Yogi. Some of these shows people have probably forgotten about. But Yo Yogi, Tom and Jerry Kids, Droopy and Dripple. And I think we did a Droopy and Dripple Kids or something like that. The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest.
Nice.
I love that show.
Even I know what
That
that
was a
was.
great
Okay.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that show. I worked on the Pirates of Darkwater.
Nice.
And I worked
I remember
on
that.
Captain Planet and the Planeteers.
Also
What did you
remember
do
that.
Absolutely
exactly?
love that. Now, what I ended up doing was I started off as a production assistant. And let's see, when I graduated from CalArts in '89, I started working at Hanna-Barbera about a month after I graduated. And they needed someone to do some production assistant work, and they told me it's not art, but at least it's something.
It's
I'm
your foot in the door. Yeah.
yes, I'll take the
Totally.
job.
Totally. Yeah.
I will totally take the job. And so I started doing production assistant work, and when I would finish up my work, I would ask.
And what did that entail?
That particular job entailed taking other people's drawings, and at the time I had to photograph them, and I had to make up these packs, these model packs. And I would take character drawings, I would take prop designs, and I would put them together. And we would photocopy these packs, and these packs would be sent overseas because most of the cartoons were animated in countries like the Philippines, Japan, Australia sometimes, China. And these packs would be given to the animators over there so that depending on what scene the animators worked on, they made sure that the characters and the props were all consistent from scene to scene. Because not one animator works on, everything, of course. You've got a team of animators, and you had to make sure that there was some sort of consistency. So by sending all this artwork over there, they knew specifically, what the characters would look like, and we would do character turns, 3/4 front, 3/4 backs, and
So
we try to be
you
as
weren't
specific
just
as
you
possible.
weren't just getting coffee. You were really learning
Yes.
the whole art and craft of
Absolutely.
animation from the ground up.
Absolutely. And whenever I would finish my duties, I would ask them if they had any designs that needed to be designed. So they would throw me things like sticks or a brick or a chair, but to me, it was designing. And that way, it was one less thing that a key designer would have to do. That way, they could spend more time designing characters.
Yep.
And so I ended up becoming a prop designer, and I designed a lot of props. If Fred Flintstone jumped into a car, I would design the car.
So this is a
awesome.
lesson
So,
for anybody
I was a
listening
prop
who
designer.
wants to be a production assistant. Always ask if there's anything you can do. It will benefit your employers and it will
Absolutely.
benefit you.
Absolutely.
This is,
And after...
I can attest to that.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, it really helps out. I mean, being a production assistant is one of the best ways of getting into the industry, learning the industry from the ground floor, and then moving up into whatever area you want to get into. And so after I learned that, what they had me do is they had me organizing different things on shows. And so I had to read through scripts, break down scripts. I had to read through storyboards, break down storyboards, and I would make lists of the characters, backgrounds and the different props that needed to be designed. And they made me into a coordinator, and I would have to cast a show according to the strengths of the artist. So I was the guy that would give out different character assignments to different artists based on their strengths. And some artists were slow, but they were very good. And I knew to give the key characters to those artists, and that way they could, give us some good, concise, character designs. But some artists may not have been that strong, but they were fast. And I knew to give all the secondary characters, all the background characters to those artists, and they could just knock those out. Some artists were into animals, so I would give them all the animal designs. Some people love tech. Some people love technology, tanks, spaceships. I would give them those props to design. So my job was to cast the things that needed to be designed based on the strength of the artist.
So you had to.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because while you're saying that, I'm thinking so many of these cartoons, they all look like they were drawn by one person.
Absolutely.
So all these different artists who had different styles, they had to learn how to the style of the cartoon. Wow.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh yeah. And some artists were better at doing action adventure things. Some artists were better at doing cartoony things, but some artists were adaptable. One artist that I worked with that was very, very adaptable, that some people in the industry have heard of, but a lot of people are not familiar with, is Iwo Takamoto. And Iwo Takamoto was an incredible artist. He was an incredible artist. And he's the one that actually created the Scooby-Doo character and back in the 60s. And this was a gentleman that, at the time when I worked with him, I wasn't that familiar with him, but as I worked with him over the years, I got to know and be familiar with some of the great things that he has done. And I worked with him on the Pirates of Darkwater. And this was a person that was very, very adaptable. He was very skilled. He was an incredible artist. And he ended up teaching a lot of artists that worked there his method of doing things. And so besides being a job, it was also school for us. And working at that studio, and I'm sure a lot of people can attest to this that have worked in other animation studios, it's a lot of hard work, but it's fun work. So when you go there, it's almost as if you're playing for 8 hours, sometimes 9, 10 hours a day, and you're getting paid well for it. And it's something that we love doing, and we really love the fact that we were able to work alongside a lot of these great artists whose work that we admired over the years. Yeah.
What are some of your favorite animated films? Like some of the Disney films. What are some that are close to your heart?
Okay, I would probably say Sleeping Beauty because of the way that it's designed. I love Sleeping Beauty. I love the character designs in that. And I especially love the background designs in
What year did that
Sleeping
come out?
Beauties.
The early 50s?
Let's see, that was, I believe, late 50s. I believe it was the late 50s. I can't remember exactly.
How about some of the early Disneys?
Let's see, some of the early Disneys that I love. I would probably say Pinocchio.
I was just going to say Pinocchio.
Pinocchio.
Yeah.
Just because of the way that one is acted. I love the characters. They really push the designs. And I love the way that they adapted the original story to film. Because, as you know, usually whenever you make any adaptation from a book, HollyWood takes liberties, so that it's very cinematic. Because sometimes when you read the book, reading a book is about how the words are composed on the page. So you're enjoying it for the way that it's written. But when you translate a book into a movie, it's visuals. It's how you visually tell that story.
And the original story is much darker.
Yes, it is.
Much darker.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah, just like a lot of the Grimm's fairy tales. When Disney did anything based on any Grimm's fairy tale, they really had to clean it up because the Grimm's fairy tales are very, very dark. Cinderella, in the original stories, had the sisters chopping their toes off in order to fit into the shoe. Ooh. Now, you're not going to show that to kids, and especially back in the 50s.
Yes.
Okay.
Dan, do you have any alternative theories about Pinocchio or any take on any of the Disney...
Well, what Disney was always big on was the sanitization of the original Grimm's fairy tales. And you see that sometimes that has led to controversy. For example, if you think about Little Mermaid, the message from the film version of Little Mermaid is exactly the opposite of the original Hans Christian Andersen story. The Andersen story is about not giving up who you are for a man because he won't appreciate it. And yet in the movie, it's all about, yes, give everything up and you'll get married. So it's very different. Same with Beauty and the Beast. In Beauty and the Beast, Beauty had to make good with the Beast because her home life was so terrible. So she had to, quote unquote, make lemonade out of lemons. And yet the movie is very romantic. And even the villain, Gaston, is not vile. Because in the original stories, Gaston is a rapist. And he is forcing himself on her, and her family will not protect her.
That's really interesting. Now, here I'm thinking of an exception to that, and maybe you can give us a different viewpoint. And is the wicked stepmother in Snow White? I mean, she was the precursor to Cruella de Vil. I mean, she was beautifully drawn too.
Yes.
She was drawn in such she was so evil and wicked.
Well, she was created after Joan Crawford, and you can see it. You can see that you can see the prefiguring of Crystal Allen in that role, in the way she plays the Queen, in the way the Queen is played. Disney would always do that. They would often model their villains against a popular performer of one type or another.
So it was Joan Crawford, really?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
just look at the way her shoulders are and her lips are. It's very high Joan in that period when she was moving from being a mannequin, which was a mannequin type character with a shop girl who makes good, into having a little bit of a harder side to her, and she was starting to be looked at as threatening towards men, and that was during the period where, even though she was box office poison, she was the most recognizable star. But what I wanted to ask Mario was to get into some controversial issues about some of this. So what's your take on the Disney shorts versus, let's say, the shorts from Warner Brothers?
I would say that if there was a fight between the two, the Warner Brothers characters would mop up the floor with the Disney characters. And I would have to say that for myself personally, I love the Warner Brothers characters a whole lot more than the Disney characters, because I think that the Warner Brothers characters are just pure satire on society.
Of course.
It was anarchy on
Yes.
steroids with the Warner Brothers characters.
They actually kind of
love that.
reflected the Warner Brothers studio, and the Disney Warner Brothers battle in Termite Terrace was very similar to the MGM Warner Brothers battle.
What is that?
MGM's battle was always high key lighting, show off how much money we had.
But what is Termite Terrace?
Termite Terrace is where the Warner Brothers animators would work. That's where Chuck Jones and Fritz Freeling and
Why
Bob
is it called
McClanahan-
Did they have termites there?
Yes, it was old wooden
Oh, yes.
bungalows.
Oh,
And I wanted to actually touch on another controversial thing that's only recently started to make it in the blogosphere. You, as an African American artist,
Yes.
what is your take on the new controversy that Mickey Mouse is a negative representation of African Americans?
What?
Yeah.
No,
Because the new claim is that he's a minstrel because of the
Oh,
way his
God.
facial features
No,
are.
no.
Okay.
Oh,
No,
dear God.
I
Some people
think
don't
that's
have enough
wrong.
to do. So, this is the consequence of some people just not having enough to do. not being really productive.
This
in
is a
their
new strain in animation, but in the academia of animation, it's all
No,
over the
I
place.
think
and
that's totally
it irritates
wrong.
me like you wouldn't
Oh
believe.
dear
No,
God.
I think it's totally wrong because I think when the character was created, I don't think that particular character, and believe me, there were some negative characters that were created during the time period that Mickey Mouse was, but I think Mickey Mouse was not a minstrel character whatsoever, because if that were true, back during the time that during the time that Mickey was created, they would have also given him black mannerisms. They would have also given him the accent, because they had no qualms about doing that with ethnic characters, because
Betty Boop.
Betty Boop. Exactly. And they did it with Eastern European characters when Eastern European characters were portrayed in cartoons. It was just the thing that people did back then.
Well, they did blackface without a thought.
Exactly.
No,
They
that-
did red face with the Native Americans. They did
Or
yellow
Asian
face
if there was
with
Right,
Asians.
right.
So
a
Mickey
good
Mouse
argument.
does not come off as a black character or let's say
Lord.
a
He's a
stereotype
mouse.
of a black character, because they would have given him the voice.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have any, because they did have black characters that were stereotypes where they did push the envelope.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you
eat
said that.
Yeah, he is
I
not
eat
a
a
black
crows
character.
And now I have
Dumbo.
to. Now Mickey Mouse is like iconic for all of us.
Absolutely.
You know. And
Absolutely.
I think that and that was probably the furthest thing from Walt Disney's mind.
Yeah.
It was mice made a mouse adorable, and then he gave him a girlfriend, Minnie.
Absolutely. Just because you have a skunk character that's black on the screen that's animated doesn't mean that it's a black character. It's a skunk.
Well, it's the cult.
Especially Pepe Le
Who's
Pew.
French?
Who's French?
Pepe Le Pew. You know what? It's the cult of victimization, and we could go on and on about that. But I'm glad that you said it.
Because it's common sense. There's so many more things to work on, but there's so many opportunities out there for people to do things in animation that are positive. Because in this day and age, we have access to so much technology. For myself, I'm not the one to complain about things as much, but one of the reasons why I got into the industry, and one of the reasons why, say, I've started taking one of the reasons why I've taken classes at Valley College in order to maintain my knowledge of current technology when it comes to things in the media arts industry, is so that I can do my own stuff.
Right. But let me ask you something.
Yeah.
How much hand to paper, with a drawing a pencil or whatever, do you do?
Okay.
And what is
It's-
the difference for you between using a software program or something and when you're doing the old-fashioned way?
It feels sort of weird, but I'm getting used to it. Right now at the Animation Guild, I'm working on a an animated project called Nosferatu. And one of the things that we're proud about on the project is that all of us that's working on it, we're using traditional 2D animation techniques, and some of it, a lot of it, is being done by hand in pencil and paper, and we scan it into the computer, but a part of it is still being done by hand within the computer itself. So for me, it feels different, but I'm used to it now. And it just takes adapting.
Well, as a writer and story editor, and I know that when I talk to teachers about teaching students how to tell stories, I say have them put their computers away, bring in paper and pencil, because there is something now. There's nothing wrong with using a keyboard. There's nothing wrong with using a software for art, but there's also there's something different about the experience of your hand to paper, the brain to the hand to the paper, and one isn't better than the other. What is the difference for you? Is there...
For me, I still prefer pencil and paper. Because that's how I grew up. That's what I'm used to, and I just love the feel of that tool in my hand, and I just love how less of a process it is in order just to create a drawing. Because With pencil and paper, I can pretty much go anywhere with my pad, sit down, make a sketch. I love that feeling. Okay, having said that, the advantage of digital technology and using what's called a Cintiq. That's what we use now. We use something called a Cintiq, and with the Cintiq, you can take a stylus, which looks like a pen, and you can draw directly on this pad called a Cintiq, and you can see the drawing on the pad itself, and it has a different feel to it. I'm used to it now. And the advantage of digital technology, though, I can tell you, there are a lot of major advantages to using digital technology. But it's still good to know how to draw with a pencil and paper. Now, having said that, the advantage of what I'm doing at the Animation Guild is right now I'm doing what's called color key. And during the days of Hanna-Barbera, when I worked there in the 90s, we had an ink and paint department. And so a lot of models and characters were Xerox onto these clear cells, and we had a whole ink and paint department whose job was to take paint and paint these individual cells. Okay, they were doing color key. Well, I'm doing color key.
Weren't they usually women too? Like, weren't the ink and paint
yes,
people,
I
Disney's people,
kind of skipped over
usually
that.
Women because of the
Yes.
attention to detail.
Absolutely, and supposedly, not every woman, but many more women's eyes are are more sensitive to colors, to color variations
yes.
than men.
Yes.
And that's just a biological fact. And so most of the ink and paint people in past years, going all the way back to the 30s, when they started to paint cells. And I think the first animated color cartoon was Disney's Flowers and Trees, and that was a animated short. And they staff the ink and paint department with women. So that was almost like a steady job for women that wanted to work in the animation industry.
But you were getting back to the the work you're doing with
getting
the
back to
animation
what
group.
I'm doing. I'm doing ink and paint or color key, what's called color key now. So,
but this time you're not using a brush or anything. You're
exactly.
using technology.
We scan the drawing into a computer, and all I have to do is just touch a certain section, and it fills up with color, and it's great. So I'm just going through all these different drawings, and I can just touch it, hit a key, and fill a section with drawing, and just touch a key, fill a drawing, touch a key.
Do you get a chance afterwards to refine it, to change it, make it darker, lighter?
Yes, you can, because the way that the program, I'm using a program called Toon Boom, and I believe the specific software is Animate Pro, but in Toon Boom, if you wanted to change a color, you can do it globally. What we call doing it globally. So if you change one drawing, you can change all of them.
Oh, it's like in Word with search and replace.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
You know what? This is one time when I regret that we're like radio, that you can only hear us, because I would love to see. You illustrate all this with examples, because it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you can change the color on thousands of drawings, but I have worked on shows before where a producer might have wanted to make a change, or if we have someone like a toy company that's also partner with a cartoon that we happen to be doing. I'm not going to mention any names, but sometimes a toy company would want us to make a change on something once we started animating it overseas. And so what the studio would have to do is call up the studio overseas and tell them, okay, stop. You're going to have to scrape off all of the paint on this cell where you painted a tie green, and the toy company wants that tie to be red to match the toy that they're creating.
So they'd have to go into every single individual
They would
cell,
have
and
to
now with this
go-
program, you just go push a button.
Absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely. And imagine how much money you save doing that too.
Yes. Yes.
Imagine how much money you save in hours. And plus, you're pushing the schedule back too. And when you have a commitment to put something on television, if you don't make that air date, studios pay a penalty. So that pushes the time back, and it just puts more pressure, unnecessarily so, on a lot of people. But now with these digital programs, you can just instantly change the color on thousands of drawings, 10,000 drawings.
That's amazing.
500,000 if need be.
You know what I'm hearing from Mario that I really appreciate is that you have the ability to several things besides obviously your gifts and talents.
Oh, thank you.
Is first of all to see where learning opportunities are and opportunities to be of service, but also gratitude.
Oh yeah,
The ability to have gratitude for opportunities.
Absolutely.
And it's and they call it an attitude of gratitude, but it kind of wipes away resentment and
because I had a dream when I was a child. I wanted to draw, and you know what? Darn it, I was willing to do whatever it took in order to get me to the stage, and it took a lot of hours of just drawing, making sketches, making a lot of bad drawings, but still, it was worth it. Breaking through that first wall and then breaking through the next wall, and with my life, I got a chance to work with a lot of wonderful people. And sort of getting back to comic books, one thing I discovered when I started working in the animation industry, and I didn't only work at Hanna-Barbera, but I've worked at Fox Studios, Universal Studios on Casper the Friendly Ghost. I worked at Nickelodeon. And in my journey through animation, I also got a chance to work with a lot of comic book artists who by the 90s had started working as designers in animation. So I ended up working alongside some of my heroes whose work I admired when I was a teenager. And there's nothing, I cannot describe that feeling, because it's almost like you're learning about the gods on top of Mount Olympus, then all of a sudden you're sitting right next to Zeus and Mercury and Athena. And it's like, okay, how did I get here? I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. But it's wonderful, and you're treated like a peer. You're treated like a peer, and that's a good feeling.
So, what classes at Valley are you taking? You're taking some right now?
Yes. Well, right now, I'm not taking a graphics class, but I have taken a lot of the media arts classes here. I've taken the video production class. I've taken the cinematography class. Loved it. Absolutely loved the cinematography class. There's a class on sound that I've taken here. So pretty much what I've been doing now is I've been learning live action production. Because I just got through getting a certificate in producing and post-production and directing and screenwriting, because I'm working on being on the other side of the camera. I'm working on learning live action, because in this day and age, live action and animation, they're almost fusing together now.
Yes.
Look at Avatar. That's animation, that's live action. But I also want to be able to call the shots. And that's the reason why when you brought up the Mickey Mouse thing a little bit earlier, to me, if people have a problem with characters being portrayed in a certain way that they don't like, in this day and age, start working on creating the type of characters that you want and get your stuff out there. In this day and age, you can create your own content. If you have a problem, to me, it's not insulting as much as not putting out what you want to put out. To me, it's an opportunity. It's like, oh, okay, so there's a market for a positive character of whatever type. Let me do it. Let's create some positive female characters.
And there's also so many more places to show this.
Absolutely.
On the internet, YouTube,
because
whatever.
you are not locked into a region anymore, because guess what? There's a world market out there.
So what do you think of anime?
Yeah.
I absolutely love anime.
Could you explain for those who don't know what anime is?
Oh, sure. That's the Japanese animation that has become very, very popular over the past couple of decades, I would say. And the thing that I loved about it, and the thing that I love about animation worldwide anyway, is that one of the things that happened here in America back in the late 50s and early 60s was that the network TV, the networks, when they started up, they needed content on Saturday morning. And so they looked at their demographics and everything, and they said, okay, what's the main demographic on Saturday and on Sunday? And they said, oh, all these kids are out of school. Let's start putting cartoons on Saturday morning. Well, one thing that they did here in America was they conditioned several generations to believe that cartoons are just for kids, just because they put so many cartoons on Saturday morning. But that was never the case, because if you look at a lot of the early MGM cartoons, shorts, and
Tom and Jerry's.
Tom and Jerry's, those things were
Tex Avery's.
Yeah, those things were made
that,
for a general audience.
A boy? Is that the Foghorn Leghorn?
Well,
that
that's
Tex
Warner
Avery?
Brothers, but
was Robert McKimson.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And Tex Avery was the
What did he
wolf.
Oh, yes.
Wolfie, aren't you the one? Those
He was the
cartoons are
one
very
who did
risque.
really sexy ones.
Yes.
If you look at what was it? What's the Cinderella one?
Well, I remember
Swoop Shift Cinderella.
Yeah.
And you look at her in that.
The precursor to Jessica Rabbit?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Red Hot Riding Hood.
Yes.
Oh.
Red Hot Riding Hood.
Okay, so you're telling us that it was in the mindset of Americans that cartoons are just for kids.
Exactly. And
Even though we did have these more grown-up ones.
Absolutely. And they were conditioned, and not on purpose, but it was just the way that they grew up in the 60s and 70s. But Japanese anime always understood animation as being an art form, the same as the Europeans. The Europeans, the Russians, always saw animation as being for everybody. And that's how animation was here in this country up until the 60s.
I see. So what makes anime? What is specific about it?
Let's see. It has a lot of Japanese sensibilities, and it has a lot of Japanese design sensibilities. There's a certain approach to the stories. The stories are very sophisticated. And when they do stories for children, they do not preach down to their children. Mm-hmm. They assume that their children are intelligent. Okay, not necessarily adults, but they respect the intelligence of their kids, but they also respect the intelligence of the population whenever they do their stories. And their stories are very sophisticated. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're dark. A lot of their stories deal with situations within the Japanese culture. And when they started to be shown over here in America, and I believe they really caught on in the 80s, but some of the early cartoons that were shown over here that became popular back in the 60s were cartoons like Astro Boy and cartoons like Speed Racer. And if you look at those cartoons were totally, and those cartoons were shown here in the 60s, those cartoons were totally different from a lot of the American cartoons from the 60s. Mm-hmm. They were edgier. Mm-hmm. Astro Boy was edgier about this little robot boy, and it was literally Pinocchio with a Japanese twist to it.
What, Dan, as a Japanese American, what is the specific twists and the things that for you make anime special?
Oh, well, first of all, anime is an offshoot of manga. And the manga, which are the comic books, were made by adults. When I was living in Tokyo, you would see adults on the train reading the manga. And if you saw a kid reading it, you'd go like, oh, this child's parents not so good, because the mangas would have high sexual content in them.
Yes.
And also the anime are more based on Asian storytelling, which isn't necessarily 3-part. So if you look at something like Haru no Oshiro, Howl's Moving Castle, you see that even though it has Western characters, it's got an Eastern style of story, and it doesn't have this, he's going to learn a lesson and he's going to have a character change. It's more of a story strung out. Or perhaps the most impressive one for a lot of Westerns who do not see the same movie as an Asian is My Neighbor Totoro.
Yes, a wonderful, wonderful cartoon. Yes.
Do you know what My Neighbor Totoro is about for an average Japanese viewer? Does anyone? Okay, what My Neighbor Totoro is really about is about the period right before World War II started. So the father is already being sent to the country, probably because he was very liberal in his opinions, and he was chased out of Tokyo. The mother has tuberculosis, and so
Wow.
she's also out there. And this was before penicillin, and so she could have. So she was really in a very dangerous place. But what's really when an Asian watches it, when a Japanese Asian watches it, we're seeing the little boy in it who's the right age to become a kamikaze pilot. And when we see the
Nice.
little girls, you get the sense that there's a potential for one of those girls to become part of the Akasenchitai, the red light districts that would surround the army bases during the occupation.
Wow.
But the thing that will save it is because they had this connection with Totoro, who represents everything that was great about Japan's past. And note that Totoro is not Mount Fuji. It's not any of the icons that would later take on a very dangerous edge during the occupation afterwards. So it's an idyllic view of what
What is
Japan
Totoro
was.
exactly? Is it a place?
It's a forest sprite. He's a spirit.
Yes.
Oh, he's a spirit. Wow, this is
Yes.
this is not Bugs Bunny.
Not
Absolutely.
at all.
Although I'm not putting down Bugs Bunny.
Yes.
Because he was an anarchist.
But as Asian as Japanese watching it, it has that sense of sadness, of sorrow,
wow.
and of separation. Same with a lot of the other movies, like and I'm not going to remember the English titles. The one about the kids who survived who are around when Hiroshima and Nagasaki are hit. You have these very serious topics,
And these are cartoons.
These are cartoons.
So do you think that they influenced someone like Kurosawa?
Oh no, these were post Kurosawa.
Oh, this is
Right.
post
But
Kurosawa.
they definitely take their cue from a lot of the Japanese filmmakers.
Right.
If you look at Tonari no Totoro, what you're also seeing is you're seeing Ozu Yasujiro's movies represented in it. You're also seeing just a lot of Japanese high culture that's buried in a way that's not necessarily apparent to a Westerner.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a Speed Racer is a show that's very different in Japan than it is in the U.S. Even though the dubbing is fairly accurate, when you look at it, it's about Japan embracing the West. That's what that show was about, because everything about Speed Racer is anti-Japanese. Not anti, but ignores the Japanese side of who created it.
Oh, wow.
Look at the eyes. When you look at when you look at a lot of Japanese interpretations, one of the problems Japanese are having now is they feel that because of manga and all of that, there's an obsession with not having an epicantic fold. So you have a lot of people undergoing operations to have their eyes made bigger. And it's because of things like Rose of Versailles, which was a comic book about Lady Oscar, a woman who made it through the French Revolution. And that was one of Japan's #1 comic books when I was still in Tokyo. So you've got a lot of interesting cultural artifacts. Look at most of Miyazaki Hayao's movies. They almost universally focus on the West. Kiki's Delivery Service, Spirited Away. Well, not Spirited Away.
Nausicaa?
Yes, Nausicaa. They're all Western stories done with the Asian spin. Castle in the Sky.
So the thing about anime is that it's very specifically Japanese.
It's specifically Japanese featuring Western characters.
Yeah.
In many instances.
Because most of them are usually have the Western characters, just like you said with the Asian or Japanese
Yes.
sensibilities. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they're pretty adult in
And
nature.
and
Very
mature.
adult. They're
Mature, yes.
So with Totoro, when how many cartoons made or how many animated features made in the U.S. would deal with something as potentially horrible as the war is about to come through. These people's lives are going to be turned around. This vision of a bucolic rural Japan would be gone.
And is this a feature length?
Yes.
I would love to see it. I wonder,
It's terrific. And
It's
here's
beautiful.
Here's what's interesting about it. It's got two different dubbings into English. And one of the dubbings, which was more recent, has the Fanning sisters do the voices. I prefer.
You mean Elle and Dakota?
Yes. I prefer the one that doesn't have stars. One of the sad things, I think, with a lot of the anime that's being dubbed into English is that they put stars in it. And stars have a great personality, but their voices aren't necessarily the best for the story.
Right.
And
So you have to do really good voice casting.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I remember one time I was looking at Akira, which is an excellent Japanese anime cartoon. And
What's
the
it
first,
about?
Akira, wow, it's to me it's very psychedelic, but it's
Blade Runner. It's like Blade Runner.
It's basically
Exactly.
it takes
Wow.
place in like a dystopic future about
Yes.
this kid, and he kind of having trouble with his family, and then
He
sort
goes
of
through a
suddenly
transformation. Yeah.
If I remember correctly,
It's almost
there's
like
no
Doc-
explanation for the transformation. It just happens.
It's almost a Jekyll and Hyde type.
Yeah,
of thing.
Oh,
where
wow.
he
Okay.
gains powers, like to essentially shape reality to bend reality to his will. so to speak.
Absolutely. And when I first saw it,
Everybody's dream.
Exactly. Exactly. Which to me is kind of represents adolescence. It's
Yes.
these
Yes.
growing pains and these things you go through, and then you transform, and then you want to become this adult or whatever to bend reality or
Right.
your reality to what you want, kind of stuff. So
Now-
it's kind of like that, but with a very very cyberpunk edge to it, if that makes sense.
and when I first saw it, I saw it in Japanese with subtitles. And for myself, I love subtitles.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, whenever something is translated into another language, sometimes the language that is being translated into misses the subtleties of the culture
Yeah.
that the piece came from.
When they do the dubbing, yeah.
When they do the dubbing. And when I heard it dubbed in English, I believe one of the voice actors from the that does the voice to one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the 80s was doing the voice of one of the lead characters. And it just took me out of the picture because
Yes.
it sounded like some kid from California.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, this, and it lost its soul, it lost its spirit because of the dubbing. And I really love subtitles because of that. I appreciate subtitles.
Well, those of us who love subtitles, we love them because we can read.
Of course.
And we
Yes.
don't mind reading.
Well,
yeah.
here's the problem with it. Now this is because I lived in Japan. In the U.S., we have the wonderful advantage of not ever needing to have dubbed programming. So we are spoiled to where most of our movies and TV shows have on-set sound, have production sound, and we get to hear our actors' real voices. Everywhere else in the world, generally 50% or more of your programming on TV, the movies that you're seeing in theaters and all that are going to come from a different country. And so you have dubbing industries that are created around creating their own vocal stars. And those stars become associated with certain with certain actors. For example, in Japan, the guy who does Clint Eastwood's voice also does Lupin III from the Miyazaki movie, and so he's a very familiar vocal talent, and people like that particular person. And in Italy, you have star dubbers, but. And Hitchcock pointed out that when you see a movie in your native language, you will retain about 80%. When you see something that's dubbed, because you're actually focusing on the image and you're hearing the sound in a language that you have complete comprehension on, you get about 65%, 60 and 65%. When you see something that's subtitled, you get about 40.
Yeah, because your eyes are not always watching.
It's also because you have a character line that can only have 60 characters. So you are condensing what should be
Yes.
big, long pieces into, at the most, 120 characters, including spaces.
And if you happen to be fluent in the language, the original language, and then you're reading the English, you will know what's being left out.
Absolutely.
You'll notice it. Yeah.
A really good example of that, sorry to go off on this tangent, but is Throne of Blood Throne of Blood has two different English subtitle translations, and they are completely different. One of them tries to capture the spirit of what's being said, and the other tries to do a literal translation. And it's as if you're watching the titles of two different
What do
movies.
you think is better?
I like the literal translation better. Because the other one is way too subjective.
Yeah, it's giving somebody else's. It's giving it a point of view it doesn't have. Yeah.
It's almost like having a whole different writer writing a
Yes,
script
it's
for
like
the,
a rewrite,
for the
yeah.
same movie.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to ask this for you guys. Your top, not animes per se, but cartoons. Like, what are some of the cartoons you love, you grew up with, and all of that?
Well, the Disney, because
Okay.
Fantasia, Pinocchio, Snow White, Dumbo, of course, Bambi,
Of course.
of
The
course,
classics.
of course, Bambi, and the cartoons that they used to show before the movie started. They used to have like a Disney nature thing sometimes, or they'd have a cartoon, The Frog That Wouldn't Sing. It's very famous. That one.
One Froggy Evening.
Yeah.
What's it called?
One Froggy Evening.
Michigan
Froggy-
J. Frog.
Yes, that's like universally loved. You know.
Hello, my baby. Hello,
Oh,
my
my honey, yeah. But I think as a child, going to see Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and then and of course there were all the re-releases, all of the ones all the classic Disney ones. I worked for Disney, and there's something about working for, and I've worked for other studios. When you work at Disney, there's something different because it's in our DNA from being children. So when you work there, it has a double meaning. Because you don't just have a job, you're working at Disney.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
and during the orientation, there was a 2-day orientation. Back in the late '90s, when I was hired to work in their residual department, and then they would show us the classic things, and everybody's crying because it's our childhood. So for me, it would be basically Disney.
That era. And Dan?
My favorite three are the Bugs Bunny versus Daffy Duck.
I know you love
Yes.
I
forgot about
Rabbit
those.
Seasoning.
I knew you were going to
Yes.
say that.
Rabbit Seasoning and Duck Rabbit Duck. Those are my three favorite. And also another Warner Brothers cartoon that I just love, a cartoon character I just love, is Claude the Cat. And there's a classic one called Mouse Wreckers, where the two mice decide to drive the cat insane so that they'll be able to get into the house. And it has my favorite animated piece, period, and that's the Upside Down Room, where they take all the furniture and nail it to the ceiling. And Claude goes crazy thinking that he's walking on the ceiling. He's somehow gotten on the ceiling. It is the most outrageous
I
cartoon.
forgot about. Thank you for reminding me. Bugs Bunny, because he was such a wise guy and he got away with it. The Roadrunner, because it was, you had the same expectation every time, and it was like somebody doing the same thing over and over again. Definition of insanity, expecting a different result. And Tweety and Sylvester.
Yes. Well,
Tweety-
you know that again, when I was at USC, it was the very beginning of animation being taken seriously by academia. So of course you have all sorts of ridiculous papers being written. And my favorite dissertation about Warner Brothers cartoons was the one that compared Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner to hell. To
Yes,
the
being in the circle.
His
Yes,
version of
yes.
hell. That's
in
his
hell,
version,
and,
yeah.
and he like Sisyphus pushing the rock up and it always rolling down. That's
Yeah.
what Wile E. Coyote
Well,
does.
it's a pretty good thesis.
That's not a bad,
Pretty
that's
good
not a bad
thesis.
theory.
Yeah, that's pretty close to the truth. Let's see. With me, I sort of have a guilty pleasure. And again, and this sort of gets back to me loving action adventure things. Heavy Metal the movie.
Yes.
I love the fact
very
that
trippy.
they
Okay,
tried
yeah.
to do something different, and I'm also a big fan of Wizards, Ralph Bakshi's work, because I love the fact that although here in America people were thinking of cartoons as being for kids, they were pushing the envelope saying, no, animation can be something else.
What did you think of Fritz the Cat?
Yeah, very, very good. Very edgy. It was the first X-rated cartoon here in America. By today's standards, it would be an R.
Of course.
But I love the fact that Bakshi was pushing the envelope, saying, do not stay in this little box. Even Warner Brothers and MGM, when they were doing their stuff back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they were pushing the envelope, but people sort of got pushed into a little envelope in the 60s, but Ralph Bakshi came back after he did Spider-Man back in the late 60s. He did the Spider-Man show. He started to push that envelope, and to me, he's one of the predecessors to something like South Park, to something like The Simpsons. A lot of people keep saying The Simpsons and South Park, they broke the mold, but no, Bakshi was doing it back in the late 60s, back in the 70s.
I totally forgot my favorite, which is Family Guy.
Oh, there you
because
go.
The writing is so amazing.
Yes.
I mean, because visually it's pretty simple. They wear the same clothes all the time.
Yes.
You know, it isn't very complicated, but of course it's the scripts, you know.
Absolutely. When I was at H&B in the mid-90s, Seth MacFarlane had started working for the company, and he was a totally down-to-earth person. And a bunch of us used to go up to Universal Studios afterwards and shoot pool and stuff up there. He was a totally grounded person, and he was one of the writers on shows like Johnny Bravo. And he had this idea that he was trying to pitch, which was Family Guy. And,
which is so politically incorrect.
Very politically
incorrect. And also
incorrect.
there is, I know I don't watch it, but I have friends who love it. And of course there's that phrasing, which is very useful in everyday life, which is Archer.
Oh, yeah. Well,
does anybody here watch Archer?
Of course.
Yeah.
That's,
Oh,
you're
yes.
looking at... Right
yes,
here.
big fans.
Dan, you watch Archer? No, I didn't. I would not have guessed that.
Now that's very politically incorrect, isn't it? And kind of violent and sexual.
Just because we're old enough to be your grandparents doesn't mean we're that old.
It doesn't strike me as your sense. I'm just okay. All right.
So Mario, as a final question for you, and thank you so much for being here
we're
today.
so enjoying having you here.
I love this. I absolutely love this.
For somebody who wants to get into animation, what is your number one recommendation for them?
Draw. No matter what technology is out there, it still gets back to the fundamentals of knowing how to draw, understanding art, and understanding how to move those characters. But ultimately, get out there and draw. Go to the mall and sketch people. Go to the zoo, sketch animals. Go to the beach. Go wherever, and just draw. And basic drawing fundamentals will carry you through the rest. Because technology can be taught to people, okay? But just having the structure, just having the underlying understanding of your basics, which is drawing, is what will carry you there.
And if you really love it, you will not be able to stop drawing.
Absolutely. And even though the first door closes, don't just turn around and walk away. Keep knocking on that. Because I tell you, to this day, the happiest day of my life is when I got that acceptance letter to Cal Arts.
And you got it because you worked for it.
Absolutely. Never give up.
Thank you, Mario. Very informational and inspiring, and it makes me want to see everything you talked about, which is like the test of a great interview. It's like I would love to have a festival and have Mario be our host.
Yeah, thank you.
Seeing all these things and many of the things that you talked about. So thank you so much. And I would like to recommend a look at a film called Foxcatcher, which I saw on DVD. I still get DVDs over the weekend. It's very dark. The acting is amazing. The makeup on Steve Carell is unbelievable. And Mark Ruffalo kind of redeemed himself for me because I thought he was terrible in Spotlight. I thought his performance was mannered, but he was wonderful as Dave Schultz, Channing Tatum's brother, in the film. And there's a lot of testosterone, a lot of wrestling. And I highly recommend a look. It's an interesting, very well done film. So that's my recommendation for this week.
Okay, this is Dan.
And this is Saran.
And Mike.
And Mario.
And Mario.
Saying thank you for tuning in to Dan and Saran Take on Hollywood, and with Michael Gonzalez and our guest Mario Williams, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Say Dan and Saran Take on Hollywood with Michael Gonzalez. I like that.